Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton. But where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and no prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
It's got to be one of the most extraordinary finds, I think, in my career. I was just so totally inspired by her story and thought, it's got to be told, hasn't it? The heroism.
Welcome to the Spymasters podcast. I'm your host, Antonia Senior. I'm a writer and a journalist, and my mission is to bring you all the best writers talking about spies, fact and fiction, historical and contemporary. In this episode, we're lucky enough to have a returning guest, the absolutely brilliant Dr. Helen Fry, talking about her new book, The White Lady, which is the story of British Secret Service networks behind German lines in Belgium during the war. And the book is full of the most incredible stories of heroism and daring do. We're going to cover a few of them in this episode. So rush out, buy the book, and don't forget to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And I'll hand you over to me, talking to Helen about The White Lady. Dr. Helen Fry, thank you so much for coming on the Spymasters podcast.
Oh, I'm delighted. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Well, we're just delighted to have you back, and we're here to talk about your brand new book, The White Lady, which is an incredible book about so many people doing so many brave things. It's almost impossible to kind of tread through it to get in a very short podcast, but we're going to try. So, Helen, there are three networks that you really talk about. One is The White Lady, which we'll start with, and then there are two others, the Clarence Service and Mill. But let's start, shall we, where your book starts, in 1914, at the beginning of World War I in Belgium. And you introduce right at the beginning of the book a character who is going to be central to the whole of the rest of the story. So why don't you just fill us in on who she is and where she is and what's about to happen?
Yes, during the course of research, you never know what's going to be uncovered, and there are always those surprising moments, and this was one of them, with the central character at the beginning, Thérèse de Radiguès. The whole de Radiguès family was so heroic in two world wars, and so I open with that dramatic scene where one of her children runs to the door, excited to pick up the daily newspaper, runs back and shouts, "War is declared!" And the father, Thérèse's husband, Henri, sternly says to him, this is bloodshed. This is not good for Belgium. And of course, Belgium is soon, very swiftly, occupied. Yeah, it becomes an extraordinary story. It's largely been overlooked, I think. We know a lot about the trench warfare, a lot of stuff on the Western Front. But what was happening behind those trenches, behind the Western fronts? And that's where this book takes us in the whole espionage story.
So it basically, you make it very clear that right from the beginning, the ordinary men and women trapped behind German lines were right from the beginning determined to do something. And they started almost spontaneously. They started these networks with no spy experience, no oversight, and just kind of started creating amazing things. So tell me about that. What happened? What motivated them all? I mean, obviously the Germans motivated them all, but what specifically made them take these risks, do you think?
Whereas patriotic, so what comes through very clear, a lot of them are practicing Roman Catholics. They have a moral compass. They are fighting for freedom. How best can they do that? Because many of them can't enlist in the army if they're women, if they're older men, if they're younger men, if they're below conscription age. So basically, they know that they just instinctively know that they become valuable eyes behind the lines. They can see everything that's happening. I mean, the Germans have created this vast hinterland eventually with all these trenches, and the British Expeditionary Force is effectively facing, a million-strong army. It's got no hope. But how are you going to get the information from behind those German lines? What about the troop movements, about ammunition, technology, what kind of guns they're using? Technology becomes more advanced, of course, in the Second World War. But that's the principle. And these men and women know that if they can, just the simple things that they can see, if they can pass this information back through the lines, and they have to eventually use couriers going into neutral Holland. But of course, what they're essentially doing is espionage. And if they're caught, they will be shot. And they knew that. But they knew the power of what they could get had the ability to give Allied commanders, the foresight into where potentially the next offensive might be if you've got a mass of troops moving that you can't see from the Allied angle. But they can. They're watching it all. They're watching the train networks, and they're developing really early forms of spycraft, all their own ingenuity.
So there are kind of three elements to it, aren't there? So there's the collecting the intelligence, then there's moving the intelligence to the British, who are effectively the consumers of this intelligence, and then there's how effective that then is. Now, on the collecting of that intelligence, there are some nuggets in your book which I absolutely adored. Tell the listeners about the knitting women of Belgium.
One of my all-time favourite spy stories, and it's been quite contentious actually, but yeah, I found the sources in a memoir from a World War I intelligence officer who went on to work for MI6, and in Professor Andrews' book on the Secret Service. These are the women of all ages who would just innocently be sat outside their cottages across Belgium, and they're knitting. So the occupying German forces, they're moving through the village or the town. They just don't take any notice of them. But they're sat outside their cottages or in their cottage window watching the train lines. And the Germans are moving their troops by train. It takes a long time, 2 to 3 days. It's not swift to move this humongous army wherever direction it's going. So they're coding into their scarves and jumpers what they're seeing across the network. What troops? Is it infantry, horses, the field kitchen, all that kind of thing. And then, of course, that scarf or jumper innocently gets lobbed over the electrified fence, which the Germans had constructed from 1915. And somebody on the other side, a little peasant, will pick it up and take it to where it needs to be. And I just have these images of intelligence officer, probably a male intelligence officer, decoding, very simple code, but decoding those scarves and jumpers.
I just think that is just, it gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? And I suppose one of the things was the Germans behaved so brutally in Belgium that I guess it raised the stakes of resistance, but also provided more motivation to resist, right? Because the Germans did behave terribly.
That's something I learned in writing this book. I hadn't fully appreciated, for all the research I've done over my career, I hadn't realised that the Germans were as brutal in World War I as they were in World War II. And places like Dinant, where there's a memorial today to over 670 women and children and some men who were just brutally murdered. They went through and they started to slaughter the populations throughout Belgium. You have these towns and villages that, experience this brutality. Just horrific. Women and children. And of course, we expect women and children to be protected, and they weren't. And that's shocking, really shocking.
And what happened to these brave Belgian civilians who were conducting espionage on behalf of the British if they were caught by the Germans? What was the kind of pattern of what happened to them?
Well, the women could be condemned to death. Many of them were condemned to death, but had their sentences commuted to hard labour, had a very, very difficult time in German prison. Some were sent to Siegburg prison, famous prison in Germany. Others were in St. Gilles in Brussels. The men, many of them were shot. And the very first leader, Dieudonné Lambrecht, who started this whole network in December 1914, he's ultimately shot in April 1916 in the fortress in Liège in Belgium, shot for espionage. And they knew this was what they were going to face. And as a result of that, his death becomes the kind of catalyst for these men and women to continue. And it's his cousin who's already been working for the network, Walter Dewey, another hero of Belgian history, actually. Walter Dewey, his cousin, only in his 30s, with a family, who takes up the leadership and carries this organisation through the rest of World War One.
That was one of the things that I found really interesting about your book that I hadn't really sort of thought about before, was how much of it was a family affair. So there were so many families involved. Thérèse de Radiguès, is that how you say? I'm terrible with word names. Thérèse has 5 children. 2 of her sons are fighting, but she has 3 daughters, all of whom are involved, and the youngest is 15. And I thought that was it. You know, I have daughters, one of whom is 14, and the idea of her, bless her little heart, like smuggling shit past the Germans makes my blood run cold. And yet they were all getting their kids involved, their cousins involved, I guess partly because you can trust those people more.
Yeah, hers is it's just a window into so many of those families in Belgium. In fact, they actually had 8 children, and some of them, you know, were 1 or 2 of them were too young at the start of the war. But the young men all fought for Belgium, so they were away, and she and her husband and 2 of the older daughters, were involved in gathering intelligence, in sheltering Allied soldiers to start with, and literally within days of the Germans sweeping through, she was in the Ardennes region. So even before Brussels is occupied, she's sort of more towards the south. Within days of the German army sweeping through that, and the massacres have happened at Dinant, we mentioned just now, the German soldiers turn up at the castle and they want the keys to the castle. They're going to billet the officers and the men in the grounds. You probably remember this incredible story where they say to Thérèse, right, let's have the keys to the castle. And she says, no, you're not having the keys to the castle. And in the end, they allow the family still to live there for the rest of the war. And so that until the British liberate that castle and that area in autumn 1918, she is living day to day in that castle, in Conneau Castle, under the occupation of the German officers. And they're getting on doing whatever they're doing. And every day she's checking they're okay and they need extra blankets or whatever it is. But she's running an intelligence sector for the British right under their noses. How can you describe such a risk? It's one thing to do it if they're nearby, but they're actually got their officers living in your castle. And she goes on to run this very important post 49, as it was called. And some of the intelligence does survive in the Imperial War Museum today.
It's completely incredible what she does. And have you been to the castle, Helen? Because I know your research is wide-ranging and impeccable. Have you visited it?
Yes, I didn't go inside, but the family took me, they don't live there anymore, but the family took me to a number of sites. So you get a visual and a sense of place, and so important. And you have some of Thérèse's agents cycling sometimes huge distances, or they're cycling between this village and this town, and you've got no sense. You can sort of Google it, it might say, oh, that's 23 kilometres or whatever, but until you actually drive those roads of Belgium, and they look almost as though they would have been in the wartime, really. Probably very little has changed. So you get a real sense of space, of the place. And one of the things that I was also shown was where they landed some of the agents by plane. And this was one of the extraordinary discoveries. And this is First World War. that again was quite controversial in terms of perhaps some historians not understanding that this happened. But there are a whole raft of files in Belgium that we did actually land, they call them aviators, but pilots into land strips in that area. They were secret agents doing all kinds of work as part of this network. So we're still learning an incredible history to actually see where they landed in 2 world wars, actually, these agents. It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible sometimes to actually really be in the place. You can kind of feel the sort of shiver of history on your neck. The network originally, as you said, was being run by this guy Lambrecht, but he gets betrayed and caught by the Germans, and it's taken up by WWII and also Thérèse de Radiguès. And it's at that point that it's rechristened as the White Lady Network, but it's sort of an existing thing. Can you just explain the significance of the name White Lady?
Yeah, they always had a significance with their names, interestingly. All of those resistance networks in Belgium in 2 world wars. And White Lady, it's based on this ancient legend in Germany that if soldiers on the battlefield see this ghostly figure, if you like, of a white lady, then, that's when the German dynasty, the royal ruling family, is going to fall. And so I think it's so clever that they named this renaissance of the network White Lady, knowing that the work they were doing, the intelligence that they were gathering, had the power to bring down the German occupying forces. And ultimately it did. And of course, as we know, at the end of World War I, the Kaiser doesn't survive either. Yeah. So that imagery is so powerful. Of course, the Germans didn't know it was called La Dame Blanche, the White Lady Network. But I love this idea that underlying all that they're doing, which is very simple spycraft, it's a very nascent early organization, but that they're busy doing all of this stuff. But they've got the name, they're working under the name of the network that they believe is actually going to lead to the downfall of the German army.
Oh, Hilton, stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton, stay, oh, Hilton, stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
With new, gentler scented Clorox disinfecting wipes, clean finally smells as good as it feels. On everything from lamps to ceiling fans. Even on your kid's toy shark. Oh, ouch. Clorox disinfecting wipes. Now available in crisp lemon. Find it on Amazon. Clorox. Clean feels good.
So the Germans have no idea, right? They think, even after the war, they think that it's been intelligence gathered by sort of hot air balloons and stuff. They don't realise it's been on the ground. Can we just talk a little bit about impact? What case would you make for how important it was to the prosecution of the war for the Allies that they had these eyes and ears behind enemy lines?
Well, the full intelligence reports haven't been declassified, but we have bits and pieces that we can start piecing together. Most importantly, it's watching the movement of those armies along that vast front line of over 400 miles. You can't defend all of that with 100,000 of the British Expeditionary Force, and even with the French forces as well. So they provided information on the direction that the German troops were moving, and by that they could predict the next offensive, like Verdun was one key example. And they're also picking up important sites that can be, sabotaged. Ammunition dumps, they can tell how many are going to be moved through the field kitchens. How many is this army going to, how many of the army is this going to feed? Right, and they're coming up through the rear. So it's a really important indicator. I just think, and there's a lot more that needs to be done, and I'm hoping more will come out, that somewhere an archive will be found, which gives us a clearer information. But they also predicted the final German offensive, and this is Thérèse's network, actually got intelligence that the Germans were about to mount this final offensive, this heavy offensive in 1918, and it meant that we could be better prepared. And you just wonder, for that tiny change in history, how different that, trench warfare, that dreadful bloody war would have turned out without this information that they're getting.
It's incredibly interesting and incredibly brave of them. And I saw that Maurice Cummings, the original C, there's testimony by him in your book saying that the White Lady Network provided SIS with over 70% of all intelligence from neutral countries and 95% from the occupied territories. That's incredible.
It is, and that's been cited in the official MI6 history. Again, I think today historians have yet to be convinced of that, and there is some view that potentially Mansfield Cummings is blowing his own trumpet, saying that. But I think certainly from the general headquarters, from the Army's general headquarters, that's true. We still can't make an assessment of whether that is historically accurate, but I'd like to think that it is. It was described. Well, I wouldn't I? That was one of the inspirations for writing this book. For over 20 years, I've always sort of half had my eye on this story, but some of the material wasn't yet available. And I was inspired by it and thought, this is a story which needs to be told. It has been told by one of the intelligence officers in the 1930s, but it needs to be looked at again. And finally was able to do that. And that's it. I'm just so inspired by its importance. Precisely that it gave over 70% of intelligence. That is utterly extraordinary.
Well, it's extraordinary. And even if Cummings is exaggerating, I mean, maybe, there's still suggests that 50% of the intelligence, we can't, who breaks down the exact percentages, but
well,
it's got to be important, significant.
Well, to add to that, again, something we're still understanding, 95% of intelligence in occupied Europe. Well, when you think about what was occupied, Belgium, Luxembourg, primarily parts of northern France, they are getting 95%. They are covering all of that. They're covering even into the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. So no, I can quite well believe it's 95%. Maybe it's 85%. I don't know. Like you say, numbers. But they are also, crucially, sending agents into Germany in both world wars. And I don't think that's quite been appreciated for World War I. We know that British intelligence had agents watching the seas, providing stuff for the Admiralty. They sent agents into Germany, yes. But what we didn't appreciate is that alongside that, the White Lady was sending its own agents deep into Germany. So it could, I believe Cummings.
Yeah, I think let's believe Cummings, definitely. Let's move on to one of my favourite bits of your book, and there are many good, brilliant bits in your book. That so this is a strong claim, and this is after the outbreak of the Second World War, and the Germans are back. They're nastier, although perhaps not, as much nastier as we once thought, but they're nasty, and there is room again for resistance. And then into the breach steps Walter Dewey again, and Thérèse de Radiguès again. And how old are they at the outbreak of World War II, Helen?
Dewey's in his 60s.
Yeah.
Thérèse de Radiguès is 74 years old. And the two of them, they have this mysterious meeting from Daniel. We haven't been able to identify who this codenamed SIS MI6 officer Daniel is. But Dewey gets a visit from him. And he says, and this is actually September 1939, so Belgium isn't even occupied yet, but it is anticipated that the Germans did it once. They're likely to do it again. We don't know exactly when. And he gets this visit and is told, look, you and Thérèse, the old guard, as they're called, of the White Lady, we need you. Off you go again. And they did. They did.
Amazing. And they enlist their kind of kids and their grandkids and to raise. And one of the things that we didn't mention in our chat about the White Lady is that they had asked for and received status as kind of military officers rather than as spies. And this happens again for this second network that they set up in the Second World War, the Clarence Network. And people take an oath and they have to swear the oath in front of Walter and the 74-year-old Thérèse, who I just can't even... I need to see a picture of her, Helen. I've only got your book in PDF. I hope there is a picture of her somewhere.
So I show you. Will you better see? I mean, I said to the grandson, bless him, I said, what was she like? And he said, oh, we absolutely adored her, but she was utterly terrifying. There she is. Look at that face.
So for people listening in, you're going to have to buy Helen's book to see the face of this utterly terrifying and unbelievably inspirational woman.
And then we've got another one, actually, of her in the Second World War with one of the grandchildren there. Look.
See, in this picture that Helen's just shown me, which, again, please run out and buy the book to see, she looks like a sort of standard granny, but she's secretly running a massive network of operatives against the marauding Nazis.
Oh, it's got to be one of the most extraordinary finds, I think, in my career. I'm just so totally inspired by her story and thought it's got to be told, hasn't it? The heroism. And it's not just her, it's not just Dewey. The heroism that comes out of Belgium, you know, it's been overshadowed for so long by France. And of course, there's a lot of stories of heroism, including, of course, we all know about the SOE agents, we know about the intelligence networks and all of the other stuff. But this is something just waiting to be told. And it's far greater than what I've told. There's so much for historians to start working on.
She recruits, well, they both do, they recruit lots of more agents, and they're running this Clarence network. Lots of the agents are women, and they go on to do some amazing things, including one specific thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Helen, please, can you just, while we're on the subject of Thérèse, could you just tell the listeners the story of what she does when she runs foul of the Gestapo?
Yes, so there's a secret network of radio operators, etc. Dewey, who is in hiding, Walter Dewey's in hiding, thinks her name has accidentally been compromised over a radio network. And she's now living in Brussels and widowed. And he smuggles himself to her house and says, "You've got to leave." She's 79 years old. And she says, no, I'm not leaving. They're not going to, they're not going to come after me. But if they do, I'm not moving. I've got to keep going. And at that point, there's a knock on the door. And I won't tell the whole story, but he flees out the back with the devastating consequences. And I'll leave the readers to read about that. One of Belgium's greatest heroes, as I said. And she, at 79 years old, is cast off by the Gestapo for interrogation. And let's not forget, she knows not only her whole of her sector, she knows she started a network with Dewey. She knows everything. And what does she do in her interrogation? She feigns senile dementia, which is going to be, even I couldn't foresee that coming. And I thought, what utter genius. And those interrogators, are going, oh, for goodness sake, who arrested her? She doesn't know what day of the week it is. She's got dementia, and they let her go. This is January 1944, 6 months or so before D-Day. And they let her go, and what happens? She survives, of course, and she goes on to continue to run her network. And her specific sector goes on to deliver the most extraordinary intelligence on Hitler's deadly V weapons. And again, I'll leave the readers to read that, because again, unearthing this stuff, I thought, wow. Wow.
Honestly, Helen, it's just incredible. I just think, what a legendary woman. I feel like I can't believe obviously I haven't heard her story before because you've uncovered it, but what a thing. Imagine that. I have a couple of daughters who are obsessed with Taylor Swift at the moment. And the reason I bring this up is I just think there are heroines in the world like Thérèse, and young people are just obsessed with, I sound like an old bore at a golf club now, but you know what I mean? Like, there are these amazing heroines. We need to talk about them.
Well, we need strong figures, strong heroes, heroines for our generation. And I do think that the younger generations are searching for that. And maybe they get it through Taylor Swift and other characters. But what I found on social media, and I'm very active on social media, particularly Twitter X, I made a conscious decision, precisely because of the heroes and heroines, not to leave Twitter X, but to use that space positively for bite-sized nuggets of history. And it is a younger generation that are reading it. Particularly people in their 30s and 40s. I know they're not kind of the age of your daughters, and you're far too young to have daughters in, their 30s and 40s, as would I be. But I think it's important wherever we can convey that history, and for people to understand also the cost of our freedoms. There's a serious side of this, of course, is that these men and women knew the price of freedom, and they were prepared to put their lives on the line for it.
The bravery is unbelievable. And I know, see, one of the things I really loved about this book is you have written books specifically about women in intelligence, which I very much enjoyed. But this book is not specifically about women in intelligence. But it is just full of incredibly brave, incredible women, because they were doing that stuff. They were there. They were on the ground. The men were away fighting, and it was the women. Well, not in all cases. There were plenty of men being incredibly brave too. But I just loved the fact that, you didn't have to search out the female heroines when you were writing this story. They were kind of finding you.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. The story sort of found me. And what I think is good as well is a lot of excitement in Belgium about the book, which it's great. Yeah, there's a lot of excitement. And I think that's wonderful because, Belgium hasn't had much, should I say publicity, for want of a better word. And yet it's this hidden dimension of two world wars that if you take away, it's not just these two networks, it's also, there were other resistance networks, of course. SOE sent agents in. This is separate from my networks, but all of that has been largely overlooked. It's just coming to light. I mean, Kate Vigers has just done her book on Mission Europe, and that includes, it's fabulous. Her research is impeccable, and she's focused on some of the Belgian SOE agents, the women. And it's time to tell their stories, to get a fuller appreciation. But of course, also to caveat to that is that because of this secret war, so much of that couldn't be told until recent times because the files were just not available. So now that stuff's being declassified, we can begin to tell these stories. And I just think it refuels our passion for history and to understand just, wow, what these men and women did so that we are now living in freedom.
Absolutely. Helen, I urge everybody to run out and buy your book. It's an absolute belter, and Thérèse, I think, will live with me for a very, very long time. And thank you for sharing the story with us on the Spymasters podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow, tweet, spread the word so that we can keep bringing you more brilliant writers talking about spies. Don't miss an episode of the Spymasters podcast.